I am so excited for today's conversation and my guest. And I am really, really thrilled for a couple of different reasons. One, how we met. And I'll tell you all about that in just a moment. But I wanted to welcome Samantha Mendenhall to the More Than Money podcast. And before I tell you why I'm excited for her, let her introduce herself.
Thank you so much for having me. I am extremely excited to be here. I love talking about today's topic. Obviously, it's one of my favorite things. But my name is Samantha Mendenhall. I'm an attorney based out of New Jersey. I'm a partner at the law firm of Irving and Mendenhall, where it's a Black woman owned and operated law firm. Our focus is estate planning and probate litigation. But we try to approach it from a compassionate standpoint. I don't want it to I don't want my practice and for the estate planning experience to be very regimented and firm. Instead, I want it to come from a place of compassion because for many of the topics that we'll get into further on down the line, it is a compassionate experience. It is an experience that requires a gentler hand. It's something that I've been doing for a number of years now, and I absolutely love it.
Oh my goodness. And as we go on, I will share my own experience with the topic of estate planning and why it is so important. And really like that whole compassion thing that you are referencing, just how needed it is. And one question that I have in a moment will be, how do you hold all that space for people? Because it requires a lot.
Yeah.
But before we get into all of that, so Samantha and I met because we were both on a panel about building Black wealth. And I just loved her presence. I loved how she commanded the room. And I loved, she just mentioned compassion. And I loved the compassionate tone and intent, but direct as well on a topic that so many people avoid wanting to talk about, even though we're none of us live here forever and none of the people that we love live here forever. And so it is a necessary conversation, and it's a necessary thing that we have to do as a part of our financial well-being. And I really just thought the way in which you answered the questions and just participated overall in the panel, that you just exuded that. But you had me cracking up. And I don't know if this was a formal part of the panel or if this might have been one of the sidebar conversations, but you're like, these TikTok people.
They're killing me.
A little bit of levity. Can we start there? Like, what is it that you were seeing on TikTok that's
Oh my goodness.
driving you crazy?
So beside let me say it like this. And I think that the best comparison in general, if you're going to social media or Google for legal advice or financial advice, please stop. And the best example that I can give of this is if you've ever attempted to use Google or social media for your health issues, right? If you Google your symptoms, Google will tell you that you either have cancer or you're pregnant, right? There's no in between. And then you go to your doctor and you find out you're constipated. That's the equivalent of what you experience
Right.
when you're talking about legal issues and financial issues. So I cringe every time, and I can always tell where people are getting their information from, but I can cringe every time I see something on social media where they're encouraging people, everybody needs this and everybody needs a trust. Everybody, stop. Everyone's situation is completely different. Everybody has different plans for their assets and their futures. Some people are still building assets. Some people are winding down. You just can't apply a sweeping brush to everybody's situation. So it drives me insane. So I might have said it out loud at the panel. I'm sure I probably did because we were in a room full of financial advisors. They probably hate the social media stuff too.
Right.
But, it's very irritating. It is.
Yeah. Definitely. Oh my goodness. Well, that's one of the things that we have in common is the frustration with painting this one size fits all solution and really just not focusing on not even just the compassionate part, but the human part, right? And if we focus on the human part of all of this, the human part of estate planning and law, and the human part of money, then we would know that everything needs to be customized, right? You might have a framework that you're working from that helps to structure and guide the process, but how you go through that process is very personalized. And you would never know that from some of the things that we see on social.
Absolutely.
So we've already alluded to the fact that estate planning can be an emotional topic, but how do you navigate that tension that can sometimes surface between helping clients make logical financial decisions while addressing the deeply personal and emotional aspects that often arise?
The reality is that the estate planning or legacy planning process sometimes is a therapy session. Sometimes it truly is um, a discussion of your family dynamics, a
Hmm.
discussion of your health issues, a discussion of past experiences that might be very triggering for people. So it is a very delicate conversation that you have to have. Also, you'll find frequently culturally, especially in within communities of color, people are uncomfortable discussing all the assets that they may have or discussing the value of their assets. And that's an emotional process for a lot of people, right? The
Hmm.
different things that they have that they've accumulated over their life. For some people, that is a very emotional thing. The items that are sentimental and why they're sentimental to them or to another person is emotional.
Right.
So I approach it from a very direct but
Hmm.
gentle approach
Hmm.
where I don't force people to make decisions right away. I sort of lay out options, give examples. I'll even tell personal stories to help people understand all the different options that are out there for them and allow them to come back to me once they've made an informed decision. But I do help to guide people. So when they call attorneys counselors, we truly are counselors.
Right.
In
Right.
family law, criminal law, estate planning, you do become a counselor. So
Right.
it sometimes very much is a therapy session. And I try to make my clients feel comfortable, and you have to build that relationship over time. And also, as an attorney, I have to control who's in the room. So frequently, people want their children to be in the room with them.
Hmm.
They might want their spouse to be in the room with them. But if it becomes apparent to me that the conversation is being skewed one way or another, or the client might be holding back from me, I start to assume it's because of these other people in the room. I'm going to ask them to leave so we can have a truly confidential and privileged conversation. So that does come up very frequently.
And doesn't that even happen if there isn't any sort of, like negative family dynamic? And here's why I asked that question. Um, so I've only ever worked in financial services, and I've known the importance of having an estate plan. And yet, my mother is the one who really took the lead in
Mm,
terms of her having an estate plan because every single time she would come down and visit, she would not every single time, but in later years, especially after her first cancer diagnosis, she's like, "We've got to talk with the estate planning attorney. Did you find one?" And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, 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 yeah. I'll get to it." And eventually, I had the kind of mother where she will give you a little bit of lee room, but then when she gives you that look, like, okay, I really better get on
Let me get on this now.
now. So I got that look. And so that very next visit, I had it all, sorted out. And so the attorney came to us and I'm a single child and I would have, and what I, the tenses mess me up because my mother has been deceased now 10 years, but it's still like present, past, whatever. I get all confused. Um, but anyway, at some point he was like, "Okay, you need to leave. Like you can't be here
Mm,
as a part of this conversation." And initially I was like, "Well, why not?" And then I understood like, "Oh, I can't be here because I'm going to be a beneficiary and there are just some things that I'm not supposed to know just yet."
mm,
So Do you think a lot of people know that?
No, I know that they don't. Also, as an attorney, my job is to make sure that you're not under duress. So
Mhm.
I'm frequently contacted by the child, right? And that's usually what triggers it with an attorney. If the child is contacting me, if the grandchild, the niece, the nephew, the younger person in the family is the one trying to start the estate planning for the older person, even if it's at the older person's
Mhm.
request, just the mere fact that that's the person that contacted me first sends off a little alarm. Like, let me make sure that this person is not under duress. Let me
Mm.
make sure that what they're telling me their wishes are truly their wishes.
Mhm.
Just in case, so we don't end up having some kind of ethical issue down the line or some ability to challenge these documents that we're creating.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Well, thank you for, I mean, I knew that eventually, like at that day,
Yeah.
but I just thought, well, if I didn't know this and I'm in it and I know a lot of lawyers, I bet you those that don't have that circle probably don't know that either.
And they could be offended by it. So I
Mm.
understand the inclination is for people like, well, this is my mom, this is my
Right.
grandmother. This, and it's like, don't be offended. I'm just making sure that
Right.
what they're saying they want is truly what they want, even when they're not in your presence.
Right.
Because it does happen a lot where they might change their mind having a private conversation with me versus when these other people are in the room.
Got it. And you said private and privilege.
Yeah.
Um, does that only extend to the person for whom the estate planning is done?
Attorney confidentiality and attorney client privilege is only between the client and the attorney. That's it. The person who is seeking the estate planning, who's looking for the will, who I'm creating the trust for, etc., it only extends to that person.
Hmm.
The moment there is another person in the room that is not a client, there's no privilege, there's no confidentiality. Anybody can find out the nature of that conversation.
Got it.
It's not as important as it would be for maybe a criminal case, right? But you're talking
Right.
about crimes that have occurred. But it's still important to be able to maintain some level of confidentiality, especially if we're talking about topics that you don't want the rest of your family to know, or
Hmm.
maybe you're not ready to disclose to everyone. You want to make sure that you
Right.
protect that confidentiality and that privilege.
Perfect. Thank you. Um, so you mentioned, you know, estate planning as being a form of legacy in your intro, and I wonder, what do you see estate planning as an opportunity of when it comes to individuals aligning their money decisions with their values and the legacy that they want to leave behind?
It's critical. So, what most people probably know, but don't realize how it plays out when you fail to plan, when you have no plan, what ends up happening is it's a free for all for any of your beneficiaries, which means things that you may have been working for your entire life can easily be sold and the proceeds divided up amongst family members. Asset businesses even that you started, right? Businesses that you started that it was your hope and your prayer, oh, my grandkids are going to take over my hardware store, or this
Hmm.
restaurant that has my family name on it, my kids are going to continue it. Frequently they don't.
Right.
Frequently they're like, I don't want to be bothered with that, so actually I'm
Right.
going to sell it. If you have these assets that are so critical to you and so important to you that you want to dictate what happens to these assets after you're no longer here, you need to have some kind of estate or legacy planning. Also, if you understand that maybe you have younger children, maybe you have special needs children, maybe you have a spouse that isn't financially responsible.
Hmm.
Maybe
Hmm.
there are many different family dynamics that may exist. You may not want to leave that person a lump sum $1 million. You might
Right.
want to say, okay, this is actually how this money should be paid out.
Right.
And all of these things are benefits of estate planning. And even if we look outside of assets, and I touched on special needs children, we can get into that in a deeper conversation if you like. But with your special needs children, if they cannot live independently
Hmm.
as adults, it is your obligation, truly, it is your obligation to make sure that you're providing how their care is going to look in the future.
Yeah.
And you have to, and where their money is going to come from, where are they going to live, etc. You
Yeah.
have to dictate that. You have
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, I have a friend who's going through that right now. They have a special needs child, and they're, they live in another state, but they, are going through that whole process of, what happens, not necessarily if she or her husband dies, but if what if both of them were to die
Yeah.
like at the same time or something. I mean, that's just a horrible thought, but it's a thought you have to like entertain. Like, what
Yep.
happens to her special needs child that at this juncture is not even yet a teenager? So they have a very potentially a very, very, very long life ahead of them that they've got to not start planning for, but be very thoughtful about,
Yep.
because they've already started, but be very thoughtful about what their steps are moving forward.
Even adult special needs children. So I've had clients who were adult special needs children. Their parents passed away from a very short illness and didn't have time to properly plan. Under those circumstances, the most critical thing to remember is e- frequently, depending on the nature of the disability, especially if it's a cognitive disability, that adult special needs person probably doesn't believe that they can't live on their own. They probably don't believe that they're not able to make financial decisions for themselves. They probably think that they're perfectly independent and can do everything on their own. But the reality is, given the nature of their disability, they're not able to make proper decisions. There's no
Right.
guardianship in place, there's no conservator in place. So now, this person who's used to having a parent who's now deceased helped them throughout every aspect of their life, but gave them the feeling of independence. They believe that they're 100% independent and can just, do things, and they're not making wise decisions.
Right.
So, even those circumstances, you're not helping your child by, not planning under those circumstances. Yes,
Hmm.
let them live an independent lifestyle while you're living, but keep in mind, if I'm not here, there's nobody here that they probably will listen to or trust to help them
Right.
continue out throughout their lives. So you have to
Right.
plan ahead.
Yeah. And then also planning ahead, I would imagine, also includes where they live, right? Because
Oh,
if
yeah.
they're living at home, which is probably the case, um, being displaced is really going to take a toll and present some other kinds of challenges. So
Absolutely.
does your plan take that into account?
Absolutely. All of those things are critical.
Yeah.
I think it's much easier for parents to conceptualize when you're talking about minors, and it's
Hmm.
much harder to conceptualize when you're talking about adults with special needs.
Right.
And they have the tendency, what I've seen for a lot of my clients, to assume that other siblings are going to be the one responsible for that child, but sometimes they don't get along. Sometimes the
Right.
other sibling is like, I don't want that responsibility. I have my own
Right.
family, my own children. I don't want to do this. So
Right.
you really have to think ahead and decide how you want to move forward with that. And it's a very difficult conversation. It is.
So before I ask my planned next
Sure.
question, given all of the different dynamics that you come across, and the scenarios that sometimes must be really hard to see, what do you do to take care of yourself in the midst of all of that?
So it's funny because um I go to therapy, and
Mhm.
in therapy, my therapist and I always talk about how when you're in this type of profession and you're dealing with people who have terminal illnesses, who are planning for their own death, who have these complicated family dynamics sometimes, you have the tendency to absorb some of that. So
Mhm.
you're like taking on some of that energy. So self-care is like essential as I continue in this practice.
Yeah.
Self-care is optimal. So I'm
Yes.
very big on working out. I think that fitness, it helps me clear my mind.
Mhm.
That's critical for me. I tell people all the time, you want me to work out because it makes me a nicer person. I'm so nice.
Don't mess with
After
my workout time.
I worked out a few hours before this, and I'm very
Yes.
pleasant right now. You see?
Yes. I did too. And I was out in the cool, fresh air that helped to clear my mind.
Exactly. I believe in acupuncture for many different things to help
Mhm.
regulate your nervous system and all of that. So I do acupuncture religiously. It works for me. It may not work
Mhm.
for the next person. Meditation practices, having a true routine at home. having
Mhm.
things that you do to wind down at night, having
Mhm.
something that you do to start your day.
Mhm.
Everybody thinks I'm crazy because I get up 3 hours before I intend to leave the house because I like to luxuriate in the morning.
Yes.
I like to walk
Yes.
around in my robe and sip my coffee and
Uh-huh.
water my plants and watch Good Morning America. That's my routine.
Yes. I love that. I
I like
love
a leisurely morning. I don't want to
Yeah.
be rushing around in the morning. I like to take my time.
Right.
And all of those things, and that helps me,
Yeah.
So when I get in my car and now I'm in New Jersey traffic on the turnpike or the parkway or whatever, it helps to prepare me for that. When I
Right.
sit down with my first client and they're crying and trauma dumping on me,
Right.
I
Right.
am prepared for that because I've
Right.
taken the time to get myself centered for the day.
Right.
So that works for me.
I love it. You can hold space without internalizing it all.
You have
I
to.
I
Yeah.
love it. I love it. I am with you on the working out. I'm with you on the meditation. So, so, so important. And I am with you on the therapist. I have a therapist and I have a business coach. I'm just like,
Yeah.
give it all to me.
Yeah. You need it. You need it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You just need to
Absolutely.
have that extra person that you trust to have
Mhm.
conversations with. And sometimes in therapy, it's not always like, oh, when I was 2 years old. Sometimes it's not that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it really is just like today is doing a number on me.
Yeah. Sometimes when I have those days, it's like man down, man down.
Yeah. And I love that my therapist tells me, email me. If something happens and it's
Right.
like triggering to you, just shoot me an email. And that's the other thing that people have to remember about estate planning. For me, as the person helping you with the estate planning, and also the people engaging in creating the plan, there are things that are going to be triggering. All of us have
Mhm.
experienced loss. All of us have probably experienced unexpected loss or loss
Mhm.
due to terminal illnesses. So sometimes, and then the fallout and what
Mhm.
happens in the family dynamics after that, or what
Mhm.
happens in your relationships after that. So it can be very triggering.
Mhm.
Sometimes my clients have experiences that are very, very similar to things that I've experienced, where it might bring something up where it's like, oh, I thought I'd worked through that, but maybe not, So
Right, right.
it really is one of those areas where you have to take care of yourself. And I
Yeah,
even encourage my clients during the estate planning process, take your time. We don't have to rush through it, but take care of yourself and be gentle with yourself in the process.
I love that. Oh god,
Yeah, you have
everybody in Jersey needs to hire her.
to.
Oh my goodness. Well, it wasn't intended to be a wonderful segue as it is, but I'm so glad this worked out because I do want to talk about entrepreneurs
Mm,
and how, as entrepreneurs, we often have complex financial lives with both, personal and business assets intertwined in some way. And so, what unique considerations do entrepreneurs need to keep in mind when creating an estate plan? And how does this impact the sustainability of their business after they're gone?
I working with business owners is always a little bit challenging, and for the reasons that you mentioned, but also um, there is a large tendency for people who are entrepreneurs to not have their documents in order. And
Mhm.
I say that because I understand how they find themselves in that situation. I want to start a restaurant. I'm starting a laundromat. I'm doing this. I got the keys. I have that. I'm ready to hit the ground running I got my LLC without thinking about your formation documents and what they say, investors and what happens with the people that may have invested in your business. If you
Mhm.
have any partners, what's the dynamic between you and your partners and what documentation do you have in place? So
Mhm.
anytime I work with entrepreneurs, I remind them or teach them that if your name is not on any of
Yes.
those documents, and I think I said this on the panel,
Yes, you
you
did. I
don't own
loved
it.
it. You have to tell our listeners that
You
story.
don't own it. So I'll never forget. I had one guy who consulted, and he was upset with me. He could not. He was so mad in this consultation, and I felt bad. But he was a developer, is what he called him, a real estate developer, and his friend owned a business, and he was an investor on certain properties that his friend's LLC owned. So he's like, I own all these properties. I'm a co-owner in all these properties all around New Jersey. So I want to make sure I protect my assets. I need a will and I need trust. Okay. Show me the deeds so I can see what the deed is. All of the deeds are in the name of his friend's company, his friend's LLC. Okay, show me the partnership agreement between you and your friend, or the investors agreement or something. He's like, what are you talking about? This is my friend from kindergarten. I don't care. I don't care if it's your mama. If your name's not anywhere on it, you don't actually own any of these documents, any of these properties. You don't own them. And he was very upset about that. But that's the reality. So frequently people own family businesses together, and your family all are co-owners on this business, but there's no documents. There's no agreements between you. So as an entrepreneur, the critical thing for you is get your documents in order, get your agreements in order, make all those formation documents would trump whatever and supersede, I'll say supersede, will
Okay.
supersede whatever you put in a will or any
Right.
other type of estate plan. They will
Right.
supersede it. A deed supersedes a will.
Mm,
Your articles of incorporation, your operating agreement, all of these things supersede your will. And you
mm.
see it all the time, all the time. And probably one of the greatest examples that I can give besides the developer, this is another one because for some people that example might be very obvious. For another one, it was a church. And you'd be surprised how much I see this with churches. So it'll be a family church where, grandfathers started the church. And in the formation documents, the grandfather says that the pastor is the owner of the church, the owner of the church. And now you have a property in the name of the church's LLC. So if you track that back, you have this church that owns a property that the church is located on. And the formation documents of the church say that the pastor is the owner of the church. Grandfather now retires as the pastor of the church, turns it over to the next young minister in the church who is not related whatsoever to the family, forgot about these formation documents that he created in the 60s, and he moves down south.
Oh,
The family is now like, okay, well, grandpa's getting old. We think we want to sell the church and, get money from the church or whatever it is. And they soon find out that the deed says that the church owns it. And you look at the church formation documents, and the pastor
that's
is the
right.
one that owns the church.
And
So
that
you
current
have,
pastor was like, no.
and this is what happens frequently. So you would be shocked. So those documents that you think you're just drafting them up real quick so you can get your LLC, or drafting them up real quick so you have something to show your title company or whatever, become very critical when you're at
Right.
this stage. Yeah.
Right. So, in that regard, would you recommend that people review their estate plans? I guess with the exception of an irrevocable trust, but would you say that people should review their estate planning documents and revocable trusts annually to make sure that what they have in there makes sense?
I always recommend while you're in the estate planning process, I even give my potential clients a questionnaire that we use in the consultation. And in the questionnaire, I list some of those assets where you have a designated beneficiary already, or where you may have created formation documents. Just double check and make sure it says what you want it to say.
Hmm.
Perhaps you had a life insurance policy and your ex-husband was the beneficiary of that policy, and you've now been divorced for 30 years. When you die, do you still want to give him $120,000? Probably not, but maybe you do. Double check. Do
Yeah.
you still want that ex-spouse to be the beneficiary of your pension? Probably not. So you
Right.
want to check. So I always recommend that my clients go back and check. And I think once people have the experience of doing that, at least in the estate planning process, it stays in the forefront of their mind, and they have the tendency to do it on a regular basis. I don't think you have to do it annually, but if you have
Hmm.
a major life change,
Right.
like a marriage, a divorce, a new grandchild, something like that, then perhaps you want to double check.
Well, I will tell you what was really interesting, and I said this on the panel. While I was a little bit more resistant to the process, I am just so incredibly grateful to my mother for having her act together and doing the estate planning, because I really do believe that it is an act of love
Yeah.
when after you're gone, that's not part of the things that people need to handle as they're grieving. So I always like to say I had my grief was uninterrupted because I didn't have to deal with things that should have been taken care of beforehand. Having said that, um one of my parents separated when I was 2 and didn't get divorced until I was 13, and I think that there are a number of different reasons for that. But um we came across a life insurance policy where he was still the beneficiary, and I was just like, "Oh my god." So, I mean, it wasn't as big of a deal because I was able to get affidavits, like,
Yeah.
saying that, he hasn't been a part of our lives for all
Right.
these years, et cetera, et cetera. But I had to find, I mean, luckily, it didn't take me that long, but I still had to find a friend of my mother's who was friend with my mother before I was even born, that knew them, that could attest. I mean, it was wild, but it was just like, of all the things, this one thing, like, I was like, what is this?
And it happens so frequently.
Mhm.
And also another thing, if even if we don't think about divorce, think about children. Most parents end up getting life insurance policies when your children are young.
Mhm.
I've had clients where there might be a 15-year age gap between them and their older siblings or vice versa.
Mm.
So when your parent got this life insurance policy, you didn't even exist. And they never
Right.
went back and changed it. So now the older sibling is getting 100% of, this $500,000 policy, and the younger sibling gets nothing. you know, that even
Mhm.
happens a lot. And,
Right.
and the parent didn't even think about it because they're probably like, of course you'll share with your sibling. I don't know.
Right.
They
Doesn't always work
well,
out that
like
way.
$500,000 and $250,000. Me and my
Right.
sister were arguing yesterday. I don't know if I want to
Right.
give her money.
Right.
Really, this happens very frequently.
Oh
So,
my
that's
goodness.
another one of those examples that people don't even think about. When you start getting and accumulating these assets, you might have more kids.
Right.
So you want to include or more grandchildren or something
Right.
like that. So you
Right.
want to make sure that you double check and include them in whatever you have,
Oh
if
my
you want to.
goodness. Right. Right,
You
that's
know,
a
well,
different story if you don't want
yeah,
to. Right, but if it was an accidental omission.
yes, yes.
My goodness. So, what are some of the common reasons that people avoid estate planning, and how do you encourage them to take that necessary step despite those barriers? And how do you, because I would imagine, I'm thinking out loud, so pardon me. I would imagine that if the person contacts you to the point where they have a consultation, that barrier of getting them to take the next step is lower than the person who doesn't even come in. So how do you get the people that need to come in, that don't come in, to take that step? And then how do you get that person that has the consultation but then freaks out to come back and finish the process?
I will say this. I think the individuals that have the hardest time with the estate planning process are typically young parents, if I'm being very
Mm.
transparent. Those are typically because they have a very hard time imagining them not being here while their children are growing up. So they have the hardest time with just finishing the process.
Mhm.
The clients that are like, let's get consultation today, sign the will tomorrow. Let's like the ones who are pushing it are my elderly clients who are like, I don't even know if I'm gonna be here tomorrow. Let's get it done. And my clients with terminal illnesses who are at the point where they're now thinking about their death.
Mm.
Um, but I have had clients with terminal illnesses. I had a client, I loved her to death. She was amazing, had stage 4 lung cancer when I met her.
Mm.
And she procrastinated on the process to the point where we never finished. She passed away. Actually, around this time last year, she passed
My
and
condolences.
didn't have her things in order. And now it's a battle between her adult son and her husband.
Oh.
And I hated that we weren't able to finish the process. But I think a part of it, I don't know if it's the reality of dealing with death. And you sort of mentioned this at the very beginning, your opening, where it does not matter what your religious beliefs are. It doesn't matter what your belief system is. It doesn't matter where you come from. The one thing you know for certain is that you will not exist in this realm, in this body forever. So it ends at some point. So
Mhm.
you need to plan for it. So typically I follow up. I like to follow up with people, just check in with them, have conversations with them to see if there are any barriers that they want to discuss with me. So, is there something that's holding you back? Is it finances? Some people are like, oh, I'm going to wait till I come back from vacation. Well, maybe you want to do it before you go on
Exactly.
vacation.
Maybe.
Well, I'm pregnant, or I'm anticipating having another kid, but maybe you won't. So there's just things. So usually there are excuses that people place on themselves as the reasons why they don't want to do it. So I try to help reason them through it. But there are some people that just in general, they're very resistant to the process because of all that goes into it, and they drag their feet.
Mm,
I think the worst time to come in and to try to do it is when you feel a sense of urgency. You
yeah.
want to do this in a relaxed way. You want to do this in a way where you're like, you know what, I'm doing this because it's going to give me peace of mind. It's going to make my family feel more settled. I'm doing, like you said, the loving and compassionate thing for my family. That's when you want to come. You don't want to wait until you're 4 months into a terminal illness diagnosis and you're feeling this sense of urgency, because then it's not even a good process for
Right.
you. It's just, it feels like one more thing you have to do.
Right. It's a task as
Yeah, it becomes
opposed
a burden.
to a gesture, like a loving gesture.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I get
Exactly.
it.
So I usually just try to reach out and see what are the obstacles that you're facing? What's concerning you about this? Did more questions come up for you because maybe you were on TikTok and now you have, and now you have more questions? Let's talk it out and let's try to get it
Right.
done.
So in that scenario, does that mean that the father and son are in probate? Now they're fighting over what's left?
So in New Jersey, you cannot disinherit a spouse. You also cannot disinherit your child if your child is not the product of your current marriage. So if you had children before you got married, or if you just had children outside of your marriage, those children automatically inherit at least 25% of your estate. So this herein is the battle. So the husband resides in this house that he lived in with his wife, but it was the wife's father's house. So it was a house that was passed down to her from her
Mhm.
family. When they came up north, they purchased this house. It has sentimental value to everyone in the family.
Right.
When the wife and the husband got married, she foolishly added his name to the deed. So now he's a co-owner of the house. And all around the United States, if you own a property with a spouse, when one spouse passes away, the other spouse automatically inherits their
Exactly.
full portion of the home. They now own 100%.
Right.
So the son, so the husband wants to sell the house and get the money because he's older, he's sickly, he doesn't have any income, he's on he's
Mhm.
collecting like Social Security, and he needs money for his medical bills and all of that. And the son is like, this is my family house. I don't want you to sell it. There's no mortgage on it. Why would we sell it? And
Right.
herein lies the battle.
Ooh, that is tough. Tough,
And
tough,
had
tough.
we done what she should have done, and had we gone through the estate planning process, we could have protected the house, or at least her 50% interest in the house, so that her son would be able to be able to make some kind of decisions.
Right. Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
That's gonna be a long thing that gets, and then now it's gonna be even more expensive, right? Than
exactly.
whatever it would have cost to do the estate planning. Oh,
Right.
so
And these are not like high income individuals,
right.
so it's at some point, usually the money is what causes the biggest, stopgap for everybody to like, okay, we have to just make a decision because we can't continue litigating this. There's no money.
Right. Right. Oh my goodness. Whew.
I
All right.
know.
Deep breath. So you mentioned, how you don't want, um, not literally you, but a person seeking your services or estate planning services. You don't want it to be, you know, um, when you are facing a crisis, whether you're on your deathbed or you just got a diagnosis. Anytime is better than not at all. But is there a best time to actually initiate those conversations, both with their family and then with taking the next steps with you?
I think anytime, well, the reality is this, right? Any of us could expire at any moment.
Mhm.
You could step
Yep.
outside the door of wherever you are and that's it for you.
Mhm.
So the best time, in my opinion, is the moment you believe that you have things that you want to protect. And that does not mean you have to have a house. That does not
Mhm.
mean that you have to,
Mhm.
own all of these things, have a business, whatever. But you have things that have some kind of value, whether it
Mhm.
be financial value or sentimental value. You have things that have value.
Right.
You have jewelry, watches, art pieces. You have
Mhm.
something. So I always have clients that come to me and tell me when we're doing these, I don't own anything. I don't have anything. I have nothing. Okay, well, you got married in like the 60s. You're going to tell me no one gave you silver or china or anything like that.
Right.
Oh, yeah, I do have a bunch of silver that my, exactly. Oh,
Right.
yeah, I did inherit, this type of cast iron thing that's
Right.
now worth, all this money from my mom. Exactly. You have things. You're just thinking, I'm not a multimillionaire. Most of us aren't.
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of things that you have. So even for young people, even I'm a
Mhm.
millennial,
Mhm.
even for millennials, a lot of us don't have children. We might have dogs. You probably don't own a house yet because it's expensive,
Right.
but you do have things. You have
Right.
things that maybe you're a watch collector, maybe you
Mhm.
collect jewelry, maybe you have an eyeglass collection, something like
Yep.
that carries some level of value that you want to protect. And any time is better than no time. Creating a will is or doing any kind of estate planning is not permanent.
Mhm.
Unless you do an irrevocable trust, and that's really pretty much permanent. But
Right.
and even that has ways that you can get out of it, but it's not permanent. So it's a will is a living document. A
Mhm.
revocable trust is a living
Mhm.
document. You can constantly throughout your lifetime keep creating new ones, making changes. You can do that. And I would encourage you to do that, but you want to start somewhere and you want
Mhm.
to get in the habit of having these documents in place. How many celebrities do we hear about who have been famous? Aretha Franklin's been famous her whole life and had no will,
It's tragic.
and has a special needs son.
Right. Between her and Prince, I was like, "Oh,
Like how? How are we
how?"
doing
Like, and you had people around you. Like, how did they let this happen?
exactly? So it's
Ugh.
like the simplest thing to do is to sit down and to create a will. It's easy. And I tell all my clients, even the ones that come to me wanting a trust, do you even have a will? Can we start there?
Right.
Let's start. We'll talk about the assets that you want to put into a trust, and
Right.
we'll create that. But let's talk about everything else,
Right.
right? Let's talk about all those other things that you own.
Yep.
You can
Healthcare
have a will,
proxy.
any all,
Yeah.
powers of attorney,
Yep.
your living will, which is
Right.
a lot of people don't realize a living will is your wishes while you're alive, but you're incapacitated and can't make your own decisions.
Mhm.
So a living will is a document that would say before you get a medical procedure, if I need a additional surgery and my chances of survival are 30%, I want the 30%, or I don't
Right.
want it. I
Right.
want a blood transfusion, I don't. Do not
Right.
resuscitate, etc. If How many of us personally have experience or know of people who had to make the decision to take a family member off of a ventilator
Mhm.
and couldn't do it and
Mhm.
left the family member on a ventilator until the last day when the hospital says this is it,
Right.
right? But they had to make the decision, and it probably still eats them up to this day.
Right.
If you have the
Yep.
proper paperwork in place, your family members don't even have to make the
Yep.
decision. You take it
Exactly.
out of their hands,
Mhm.
and you're letting your medical
Mhm.
professionals know this is everything that I want. I don't
Mhm.
care what they say. They can be in here
Yep.
crying.
Yep. Mhm.
This is what I
Mhm.
want. And
Mhm.
like you said, it's a very compassionate and loving
Yep.
thing to do, especially if you have only children,
Mhm.
if you have people that are very emotional in your life and can't make those tough decisions. Like I'm usually the person in the family that they call in to be like, okay, can you talk to them because we need to,
Right.
get this stuff done and make these tough decisions.
Yeah, I'll tell you, knowing my mother's wishes around DNR was
Hmm.
so beneficial, um, because she wanted to die at home. She was hospice at home, and she wanted to die at home, and, I just could not get her comfortable. Like, just the morphine was not working. So I called the night nurse and they came. And I was like, but she wanted to die in the house. And he was like, you did your job. It's okay. But
Yeah.
she had I didn't even know there was such a thing as a death gurgle, but that was going on. He was
Hmm.
like, let's take her to the hospital. Let's get her comfortable. And we did that. They did comfort care. But
Yeah.
because we knew what her wishes were, we did not like try to do anything to
Life
resuscitate
saving.
her.
Yeah.
Yeah. And while it was hard, I just felt great that I was able to honor her wishes, and including as best I could with her passing in her house, you know?
And that you knew what her wishes were.
Yeah.
Because that's another thing that I've encountered, even in my own family, where someone is ill. It's obvious that they're ill. It might even be obvious that this might be towards the end for them, and people still can't have the conversation.
Right.
Whether it's the person that's dying or the
Mhm.
people around them, they just can't have the conversation.
Mhm.
And to me, it's one of the saddest things to see because it's a it's almost like you're detached from reality and detached from what's actually happening, but also you don't realize that one of the worst things that you can require someone to do in grief is to make all of these difficult decisions.
Exactly.
It's like
Yeah.
I don't want to be grieving and thinking about how we're going to pay for your funeral. I don't
Right.
want to be in grief thinking about how many times do I resuscitate this person? Do
Right.
we start palliative care? I don't want to have to make any of those decisions.
Right.
And I remember one of my uncles had ALS, and ALS runs in my family. And at some point, his lungs started failing. So he's on a ventilator. He's, for all intents and purposes, not dying. Like his heart is still beating, but he can't breathe on his own.
Mhm.
Even under those circumstances, they can't leave you on a ventilator forever, right?
Right.
It's like either we're going to do a trach and he's going to live like that, or that's not,
Mhm.
or, we're going to stop the ventilator. And he kept crashing, and my cousin kept like resuscitate him, resuscitate him, resuscitate him. And at one point, when he was resuscitated, my uncle took off the oxygen mask and said, "Stop doing this to me."
Mm.
And the doctor was like, "That was clear as day to me, so I'm not
Right.
resuscitating him anymore." And he
Wow.
passed a few minutes after that. But it's like, if you are too scared to, and my
Mhm.
uncle was sick for years. They didn't
Mhm.
really know what was going on with him, but he was sick for years. And it's like, but you're not having those conversations, and you
Yeah.
have to. You
Yeah.
really have to.
Ooh. I'm so
Like,
sorry your family went through that.
thank
I'm
you.
glad he had that moment, though, where he could express his wishes and the
Exactly.
doctor was in the room.
Exactly. Exactly. And my mom
So
was
good
there.
to hear
My
that.
mom's a nurse. She was there, and she's just like, you can't keep resuscitating this man. Like, what
Right,
kind, even if he survives, what kind of quality of life is he going to have?
right.
So
Yeah,
and a lot of it can even be a difference in how you look at things, right? Some people are like, keep me alive. I don't care if I'm living in a fish tank, keep me
right,
alive.
right,
If I'm in a
right.
chamber, I want to be alive. And other people are like, I don't want to live like that.
Exactly.
So it really just
Mhm.
depends on the person, which is why knowing your family members, knowing your wishes is very important. And the
Right.
other thing that goes into your estate planning is what you want to happen with your body, what you want
Mhm,
to happen with a memorial service or a funeral.
mhm,
All of that stuff is important. Frequently, people disagree with cremation versus
yep,
burial and all
mhm,
of those things. If you have strong opinions on these things,
yep,
put it in document,
yep,
put it in
yep,
writing.
and it's so funny you would say that because we were very clear, my mother and I. She was cremated, I wanna be
Yeah,
cremated. I was like, there was no question about that, but you're
right.
right. That would have sucked if I didn't know that,
Yeah.
right?
Or even if you were not the only one who made the decision. So let's
Right.
say, like, I have a sister. My mom's always made it clear that she wants to be cremated. But if my sister believes in burials and not cremation, and I believe in cremation, even though my mom has said that she wants to be cremated, my sister might still insist, no, she's going to be buried. You know, so
Right.
then it's like, what do you do in those in
Right.
that situation
Yeah.
if it's not in writing?
It would be tough. I just want to pause here and say for those listening that I think it's important that you all know that despite me knowing all these things, despite my mother being a really good example, it took me 7 years post her death to get my act together and to actually then get my revocable trust done.
Yeah.
And it was, I'm embarrassed to say, but it was two friends who died unexpectedly in their 40s. And I just had this moment where I was like, I do not want two things. I don't want to embarrass my mother by not having my it together. She set an example for me. What the
There
heck am
you
I waiting for? And
go.
I also don't want to be that financial person. You know how we talk about the artist and it's like, what
Yeah.
the hell? Why didn't you have your act together? I don't want to be that financial person. And she was talking all this stuff and she didn't have her stuff.
Had a whole podcast.
It's like, that will not be me. But I will tell you, after I did it, I called up a friend. I was like, I need a bourbon.
Yeah. It's hard.
All adult and everything, but
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
So if you are listening and you are like feeling any sort of ping, get it together. And if you live in New Jersey, then definitely reach out to the Irving Mendenhall firm to see
Thank
if
you.
there might be a fit there. Um,
I would also say just one little comment on that. There's no such thing as, even though I talk about not wanting to do it under duress, not wanting to do it in a sense of urgency, we touched on it before. It's never too late to do it. The only
mhm.
time it's too late is if you're not able to finish your documents, like my client. Don't ever be ashamed that you waited too long or your kids are adults now or whatever. Don't be ashamed of that.
Right.
The fact that you're taking the initiative is, you're legions ahead of most people, number one. But number two, you're still doing the right thing for yourself. That's like someone who has been smoking cigarettes their whole life and now they're 50 and like, well, it's too late for me to stop now. No, it's not too late. Stop now.
Yep, exactly.
Right now.
Exactly. Yeah. And sometimes when you stop, when at whatever point you stop, like 2 years later, whatever the, effects on your lungs is almost kind of gone. Well, not
Exactly.
entirely, but
Right. It can
minimized
be reversed.
rather than if you had kept going.
Exactly. Precisely. Exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes people are nervous, I think, to admit how little they know. And I think we talked about this a little bit in the panel, that there's a lot of discomfort with people approaching financial advisors or approaching
Mhm.
attorneys in these situations. And that's why they seek out social media and Google and those and LegalZoom and all of that, because they're too embarrassed to talk about all the things that they don't know. And let me assure you, any professional that you go to that shames you, walk out the door immediately. Don't give them a dollar.
Yeah.
There is no shame in what you don't know.
Mhm.
There's so many things I do not know.
Mhm.
And you
Mhm.
don't have that shame when you go to your doctor. You
Right.
don't have that shame when you are getting your taxes done, that you don't
Right.
know all the ins and outs of the tax code. So
Right.
do not be ashamed of what you don't know about your assets, about your estate plan, about the value of things. Don't be ashamed of that. You're stepping into the room and you're going to learn how to start assessing those things and making proper decisions. You have to start somewhere though.
That is just so powerful, especially because I think as a culture, we do have a tendency to shame people.
Yeah.
And that just never really produces any good results or outcomes when we shame, which is why, like, even when my work, like one of my really key values is I'm a non-judgmental zone.
Right.
So people are like, oh my goodness, my situation is probably the worst you've ever seen or heard. No, it's not. And even if it were the case, okay, we now know what we got to deal with. So like,
Yeah.
let's get to work.
Right. Yeah. But you know what? I take it back what I said because people do have shame in terms of going to get health care and things like that because they know they didn't take care of themselves. We have to free ourselves from that.
Mhm.
We have things that we know we're supposed to do that we don't do. We procrastinate on it. And then you finally get to a point where you seek out the services of a professional and you're like, oh, I feel so terrible that I wait. Stop blaming yourself.
Yeah.
Stop that.
Yep.
Don't continue doing that. It's okay.
Yep.
You acknowledge that you needed to get it done and you showed up and you're taking care of it.
Exactly.
That's all you could do.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's so key. And I think another thing that's really key, and you alluded to this earlier, is that you don't need to be a multimillionaire. My
No.
mother worked for Social Security for 38 years. You know, I don't remember what grade she was, but
Yeah.
she was not a millionaire, right? But yet she was like, no, we're doing this.
Mhm.
So I think it's also like that reframing of who estate planning is quote unquote for and who it isn't. I think that is probably a myth that needs to be debunked too.
I agree with that. And that's why I try to focus on the assets that most people are likely to have.
Mhm.
Like I talked about before, maybe pieces of artwork, jewelry, etc., those types of things. But I also focus heavily on people who own properties, have businesses, have children, have spouses, but you may not want to leave everything to your spouse. People who find themselves in those situations, you need an estate plan. And even before you find yourself in that situation, like we talked about, you need an estate plan. You need something that dictates where things go. If you're
Mhm.
someone who, and I've seen this many times, where maybe your parents and your grandparents are deceased. So that means your next of kin would be your siblings. If you don't have an estate plan, your siblings would be the ones to inherit all of your assets. Let's say you don't talk to them. Let's say you don't like them. Let's say you don't trust them. Let's say they're, have made life choices that makes it so you don't want to leave them any of your things. Then who are you going to leave it to? Because they automatically are going to receive everything.
Hmm.
Or let's say
Yeah.
you don't have any siblings and all you have are first cousins that you don't even
Mhm.
talk to, but
Mhm.
instead you want to give the money to your best friend's child
Right.
because
Right.
that's like your baby, that's like your
Right.
niece. Maybe that's what you want to do.
Right.
Everybody, life circumstances are so different now than how they have been in the past, with less people having children, less people deciding to get married. Especially if you cohabitate and things of that nature,
Mhm.
you want to have an estate plan to protect your partner and the assets that the two of you may have created together. There's
Mhm.
just a lot of things that come into consideration, which is why I don't like Google.
Right, because it doesn't take into account, those blended families, those non-married partners. It doesn't take into account those nuances
Right.
that, A,
They're
B,
relevant.
C, D on Google is not going to get you an answer to. Yeah.
Exactly. It's very relevant. Like, I'm
Right.
going to take into account and explain to you the consequences if you do nothing, and then explain to you what you can do based on what you tell me you want to do.
Right. And I guess that's the other thing, right? You are only able to do as great of a job as you can do if people are honest with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep.
They
Absolutely.
have to put it all on the table. And that's
Exactly.
where the no shame, no judgment piece really comes into
Exactly.
effect. Well,
Exactly.
I want to be mindful of your time. And so, one of my questions here as we begin to wrap up is, and maybe you've already answered it. So, maybe this is more of if there's anything that you feel is left unsaid around how a well thought out estate plan can contribute to your overall financial wellness and peace.
Hmm. So, one of the key aspects of a estate plan in general, or legacy planning, is taking into account every single thing that you have worked for, created, earned in your life, and deciding what you want done with those things when you can't make the decision yourself, because estate planning and all of that is not always, like we mentioned, when
Mhm.
you die, but it's also when you're incapacitated. and what you want done with those things, and who you trust around you to carry out all of these things that you say that you want.
Mhm.
And what I find every single time after a will execution, every single time after we execute a trust document or a power of attorney or something like that, is my clients like, oh, a
Yes.
sigh of relief. I
Yes.
can walk out of here with some level of peace, knowing that at a minimum, I took care of this thing
Yep.
that was like on their back, that they
Yep.
felt like as a mother, I should have this, as a father, I should have this, as a husband, wife, whatever, child,
Mhm.
I need to have these things in place. And
Mhm.
now you finally did it for yourself.
Yep.
And I think that's really what it is. It's that sigh of relief at the end of it, because you know that you did something to protect all of these things that you've been working for your life in your
Mhm.
lifetime. And
Mhm.
you don't have to be a millionaire, but you've
Right.
been working for these things.
Right. No, I really appreciate that. And I don't have children. Um, and so my beneficiaries are the children of my close friends.
Yep.
And one of them is an artist and she's rocking it out. But I left her some key pieces, but I have a caveat. And my caveat is if you don't want any of them, you cannot sell them. You need to make sure that the executor of the estate knows so that they'll know what to do
Right.
next. And
Right.
part of that is because I have seen instances where art in Black families, it it's not recognized. And
Mm.
so people don't know what they have,
Yeah.
right? And they don't realize that it actually is an asset and there's some value to it. And yeah, I was just like, I just wanted to stay as best as it can in the quote unquote family, like the family that I've created. They're not
Yeah.
blood, but the family that I've created.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And again, I always encourage my clients, because I mean, I can't even tell you, every single time I do, I create a will. Unless I have clients, and I do have some clients who, are jewelry collectors, they collect Rolex watches, like they
Mhm.
understand the assets that they've accumulated in their lifetime. But I cannot so many people, I don't have anything. I don't have anything. I'm like, even your engagement ring that you're wearing has some kind of value, whether
Right,
it's financial or sentimental, it has value.
right,
Your family photos, who do you want to have those?
right.
There are all these things that you have that you want to make sure that you provide for. And I am a huge proponent of making sure that it's all in writing for circumstances, especially like you just described. If you don't have children,
Mhm.
right? If you don't have close relationships with other family members,
Mhm.
then now what?
Right.
So this is when you really want to make sure that you're planning ahead.
Yep.
And you're really taking inventory of these things that you have accumulated that have value to you, that
Mhm.
you want to leave to other people.
Right. Definitely.
Mm,
So two more questions and then I'll let you hop.
no problem.
Um, do you think that some of the lack of awareness around the importance and the value of estate planning, do you think any of that is connected to any sort of systemic barriers?
I think that anything that uses the word estate, people have the tendency to believe that it's for the wealthy, and that it's not intended for them.
Sounds
So
expensive.
many times when I've done workshops and I talk about estate planning, people are like, "Well, I'm not rich. I've been working for DPW for 30 years. I'm not rich." And it's like, yes, but when you die, you will still have an
Right.
estate. That's just the
Right.
name of it. So I think that that's a big piece of it. And I know that historically, we haven't been included in these conversations.
Yeah.
We haven't been provided, people of color have not been provided with financial education. And if you don't have the financial education, you're not even going to think about what to do with your financial documents or create financial
Right.
documents and estate planning documents at the time of your death.
Right.
You have many people who don't even believe in banks, and
Right.
they don't use banks. They keep money under the mattress
Yep.
or in the drawer or whatever. So you're even overcoming those types of obstacles.
Mhm.
So to have a conversation with people, our people, people who look like us,
Hmm.
about these subjects, you really have to get to the point where they understand that this is something that's for everybody and
Right.
not just for someone who is a multimillionaire, a
Yep.
Rockefeller, whatever.
Yep.
It's not
Yep.
for just for
Totally. Yeah,
yeah.
totally. Okay, so you and I are having this conversation in December, and it won't go live until the new year. But as folks reflect on this year and what a doozy it has been,
Yes.
and get ready for 2025, what words of wisdom would you have for them?
Similar to what I touched on earlier, I think as you're looking towards the new year, as you're going into hopefully what will be a better time for all of us, because New Year's Eve is my favorite holiday because, just a side note, it's my favorite holiday because it's the only day of the year where I feel like collectively people feel like tomorrow could be better, right? That I can change
Mm,
who I am. I can be a different version of myself. My life is going to be so much better. It's
right,
the only day where you really have that feeling and it's collective.
right. I
So
love
that's the reason
that.
why I love the holiday. And you can
Uh-huh.
celebrate it however you want, but you still
Right,
have that feeling.
right.
So that's why I encourage people to walk into the new year with fresh eyes, walk into the new year with a desire to get things in order in a way that's going to give you that peace that we talked about before.
Hmm.
So, it doesn't mean that January 2nd, you need to be calling every estate planning attorney that you know, but maybe say
Right,
to yourself, first quarter, I'm going to at least have a consultation.
right.
First quarter, I'm going to do a very bare bones Google search of what these different types of documents are. So at least I'm informing myself. And then I'm going to do a Google search to find an attorney to assist me or a financial advisor who might know attorneys that can assist me.
Right.
That's really what I would encourage people to do as you're going into the new year. We're in times that are unprecedented, right? Every single day, you turn on the TV and it's like, this has never happened before. We've never had this type of weather before. We have drones, we have this, we have that.
Right.
All these things are happening. This is one little thing that you can do for yourself and for your family that is a form of self care.
I love that. I love that. And I think what I would add to it is as you're doing this for yourself, ask your family members and your friends if they are doing it as well,
Yeah,
or invite them to do it so that it's not a solo activity. And you don't have to go into all of the details around what you're doing and all of that. But even just saying, hey, I'm planning to do X might be the seed that somebody else needs to start thinking about that for themselves. So then you have this positive ripple effect of, more than one person in a particular community getting started and going down this road.
absolutely. And if you care for your family, if you care for your friends, if you care for all these things that you've worked for in your lifetime, consider it and do it. It's not nearly as hard as you think it is.
Oh my goodness. I love that. Consider it and do
And
it.
just
And the whole notion of fresh eyes and having it, getting things in order so that you can have peace. I think that is a wonderful way to end our conversation today. But I'm hoping that we will have many more. But
me
I
too.
do want to thank you for your time today. I really, really appreciated our conversation. And I just love how hopefully people will get that this is, accessible and it doesn't have to be judgmental or shame ridden. And while it is serious, as you can tell by our banter and our laughter, we don't have to be serious.
Yeah.
So, Samantha, thank you so much
Thank
and
you for
happy
inviting me.
holidays to you and your family.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here with you today. Hopefully, I'll come back and
Yes,
happy
definitely.
holidays. Happy New
Yes.
Year to everyone.
Happy New Year for sure.
Take care.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.